Hello, friends. Our 17th story is inspired by this. Now, many of you will probably recognize this. If not, then hopefully you will at some point in the near future. Our story begins in 1963 with a gentleman named Lee Mendelson. Now, Lee was an interesting guy. He was a producer, and he actually loved documentaries. And he had just finished doing a documentary on the world's best baseball player, Willie Mays. But something in his mind triggered, and he said, "What if I did my next documentary on the world's worst baseball player, Charlie Brown from the Peanuts?" Now, the Peanuts comic strip began in 1950. It began very, very small, but had been gaining in popularity ever since until it became kind of nationally known. So Mendelson thought a good idea for a documentary would be to talk about the characters and talk about the creator, Charles Schulz. Schulz had seen his previous documentary work, and so agreed to see Mendelson, and they began to talk, and a friendship was born. And together they began to work on this project, trying to get various things together. One of the things that came together rather easily was the music. Mendelson was driving along, and he hit the Golden Gate Freeway, and he was listening to a tune, and he really liked it. And it turns out it was made by Vince Guaraldi. And so he calls up Vince Guaraldi and is able to get his phone number and everything, and says, "Hey, would you be interested in doing the music for this show?" And so, not the show, but rather this documentary. And so he hires him. And a couple weeks later, he gets a call from Vince. And Vince says, "I want you to listen to this over the phone." And he starts playing. And it was the tune that would become known as Linus and Lucy. So everything was coming together for this documentary, except the one thing that was absolutely necessary. No corporation would fund it. And that's how it worked in those days. The corporation needed to fund a documentary like that, and they simply could not find a buyer. So after a while, Mendelson started taking other jobs to pay the bills, and the project just languished, never to be completed. But a year and a half later, he got a call. A year and a half later, the Peanuts landed on Time magazine, the cover, right? And that just basically meant now they are a national phenomenon. And that triggered an idea in the mind of John Allen. He was a executive at the Coca-Cola Company. He had remembered Mendelson's pitch for a documentary, and they had turned it down. But he had an idea, and he called Mendelson and said, "Have you ever thought about not doing a documentary, but doing a Christmas show?" So Mendelson called Charles Schulz, and Charles Schulz, of course, the creator of the Peanuts, and pitched the idea, and Schulz agreed. But here's the problem, and this is where the story becomes very condensed, because time was tight. Coca-Cola needed an outline within a few days, and they were going to answer yay or nay within the week. And so the two of them, Schulz and Mendelson, immediately brought on a third man, an animator named Melendez, who was good at what he did, but he had never made a full-length cartoon like this. The three of them got together, and in the space of one day, they pounded out the entire special, what it would look like. Schulz thought the whole thing should revolve around a Christmas play, so that was one idea. Melendez, he talked about an animated dancing sequence, and he wanted the characters to skate at some point. Mendelson talked about doing an ugly duckling tree, kind of like I showed you a little earlier, based on an idea that he had read in a story by Hans Christian Andersen. So ideas were flying around without connection, but Schulz connected them all, and in the space of that afternoon, an hour of kind of brainstorming and then the rest of the typing it up, they had an outline of this Christmas special. And so they shipped that off very hurriedly to Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola approved it a few days afterwards. And that's when the real work began. And it was frantic. They only had 6 months to finish, and it was a unique project. They used children to voice the characters. In those days, they didn't do that at all. Adults would voice everything, including children's characters. And so this was very unusual for the time. It took a little bit more time than otherwise would have been required. The characters, the way they were drawn, with big heads and small bodies, it was fine for the comics, but it was very tricky tricky in terms of animation and posed unique challenges. And those had to be overcome. The music, of course, the music was brilliant, but it was not very Christmas-like. And so Mendelssohn's trying to figure out, how do I make this a little more Christmassy, especially the opening shot. And so he listened to that track, that opening track, and he thought, I need some lyrics on this. So he contacted some songwriters he knew. All of them were busy. None of them could contribute. So in desperation, he goes to his kitchen table and he starts writing down lyrics to this opening score that Gherardi had put down. And that is how the song Christmas Time Is Here came to be. He wrote those down, had a children's choir record it, and that is the opening sequence. And so they've done all of this creation. There's very little tweaks and stuff they can do, but by far the majority of everything is there, and it's far too late to change anything of importance. It's just a little bit of troubleshooting. That's all they can do. And they show the first version to the animators who worked on it. And most of them were less than enthusiastic. They were perhaps critical, and they didn't like it much. And so Mendelssohn was very discouraged. But one of them, a man in the back, stood up and he said, "You guys are all nuts. This is going to run for years and years." But popular opinion was against him. The execs at CBS were also concerned. They didn't get it. They didn't understand why they used children's voices. They didn't understand why they had used the music they did. They didn't understand the pacing. But the CBS had been pumping it for months, saying there's this big Christmas special, and it was already on the schedule, so there was no turning back. They had to air it, but they said confidentially this will probably be the last Peanuts special. So with all of that, Mendelssohn and Melendez, they were convinced they'd probably killed the comic strip and that no Peanuts special would ever be made again, and they were rather discouraged. And so the day came, December 9th, 1965, a Charlie Brown Christmas debuted. And half of the televisions in the United States were tuned into it, half, 50%. And so it showed, and Mendelssohn walked into the neighborhood coffee shop the next morning, not sure what to expect, because people knew in the coffee shop that he was very much involved with that project. And as soon as he got in there, everybody began to congratulate him. And that's when he realized that the special really had resonated with viewers. It became, in fact, an instant classic. It won a Peabody Award the next year in 1966. But to the surprise of everyone, except for those who had been able to preview it, to the surprise of everyone watching, Linus, the character with the blanket, read the Christmas story from Luke chapter 2. And that had been the design from the beginning, because from the beginning, Schultz had insisted the special has to be about something, namely the true meaning of Christmas. Otherwise, Schultz said, why bother doing it? It was a bold move in 1965 when the culture was not favorable to Christianity. It caused considerable consternation to some who worried that it would not be well received and would contribute to the demise of the Peanuts and certainly ensure no more specials were done. But contrary to all expectations, the 2-minute reading by Linus became, in the words of one expert, the most magical 2 minutes in all of TV animation. And the special, an instant classic, even today. In part because Charles Schultz refused to forget the important things during the Christmas season. May we do so likewise. Blessings, my friends, and take care.